get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
Well, hi diddly do, Kneecaps Nation. You're locked and loaded again for another edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progrard, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by my longtime partner in crime, Phil Byrne. And Phil, some good, wholesome family values content on this upcoming episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, wouldn't have any other way.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is, I feel like we always say this, right? We go to record our show, and then it never ceases to amaze us. News breaks left and right. So,
Oh yeah.
If you caught us, for the last week or so, and they're like, when did they tape this? Or like, I swear, we are recording these and getting them out as soon as possible to you. But we had a ton of news break. We're kind of on that precipice when we're recording this now of free agency starting, the tampering season upon us, and right before that, it seemed like there was a flurry of Lions moves to kind of get us going, and yeah, that's kind of where we pick things up this week for you.
Yeah, I'll put the ball in your court, Phil. Where do you want to lead off? I mean, we've got so many different options we can we can jump right into here.
Let's start with the first one that kind of happened, and that's the David Montgomery trade.
Yep.
So Monday afternoon or Monday morning, we get word that
which is literally hours after the podcast dropped.
Yep. So we get word that the Lions and Houston Texans agreed to a trade. Basically, David Montgomery getting traded over to the Texans. The Lions, in return, I think it was reported it was first just a 5th round pick. We were able to move that up to a 4th round pick.
With the caveat that they would take on the dead body of Juice Scruggs.
We got the juice. Yeah, Juice Scruggs and one other pick.
7th rounder, I believe.
7th rounder, I think. Yeah.
That's
so anyways,
that
costly, deal was
that's a costly amount to just move up one round on that draft pick.
It seems like it, right?
So your thoughts on that, Phil? You think you think this is a worthwhile trade for all parties involved, or you think this may not be in the Lions' best interest, short and long term?
Yeah. So I mean, we had kind of talked about this leading into that week, that I think there wasn't really a value that you could go ahead and place on David Montgomery for what his skill set kind of brings to this team. Thankfully, Jahmyr Gibbs has been relatively healthy in his career to this point, but
on a balanced pitch count, though, because of having David Montgomery around.
Yeah, so obviously, this is probably going to play into what you would naturally assume, probably a contract extension in Gibbs, where he's a clear number 1 if you're going to pay him like that. But it just, unfortunately, yes, you do get Scruggs, who was a 2nd round pick a handful of years ago coming out of Penn State. I think had promise, never really got developed. He's still young enough, if he can stay healthy, where maybe he's some solid depth. But I don't think you're looking at him right now and saying that he's going to be a day 1 starter, even though there are plenty of holes on this Lions offensive line, which asterisk we'll get into in just a minute. Yeah, so I was pretty disappointed, to be honest. I'm also kind of the part where I think the Lions do need more draft picks, because I think they do have to get more creative with the players that they are bringing in. But we're talking about a trusted veteran we know can get it done. The savings that we're getting here are not massive to the point of okay, well, this is going to be thrown at keeping someone or signing a free agent that can come to this team. It's pretty minuscule savings as far as getting that done. So, listen, I'm always good for getting more draft picks and stuff. Unfortunately, we haven't seen Brad Cook in a while, as we've been talking about, but I think this is a move that will hurt the Lions. I just don't. There's no David Montgomery that they're going to bring in off the street that can replace the value that he had for this team.
Absolutely not. And I think the way you need to look at a trade such as this is, are the Lions a better team right now? Is their organization better off right now because of this move? And I can't sit here and say that they are. You
No.
have a guy that is fully capable of 8 to 12 touchdowns on a conservative end with a split load with Jahmyr Gibbs. You got a guy who, if you know you need to pick up short yards on a third down, got to have it. Fourth down, got to have it. Hand it to Montgomery, and chances are he's going to be the guy to pick up that key yard, that key couple of yards for you. And I just don't know that removing him from the equation is what's best for the Lions as far as winning games right now. And I understand that there was some scuttlebutt out there about how he wanted to be traded or what have you, but the franchise has a right, more or less, to deny that request, more or less. And it's up to them as adults, along with Montgomery's camp as adults, to just try and figure some stuff out. Why is it that all of a sudden you're not happy here? Is it just because you were splitting time with Gibbs? I got news for you. He was splitting times with Gibbs going all the way back to Gibbs's rookie season. And okay, I understand that winning covers up a lot of those wounds, if you will. And there wasn't a whole lot of winning that took place this past season. They didn't make the playoffs. They finished just a game over 500, da 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 da. Let's not get this twisted here. It's not like they totally tanked the heck out of the season and they're in line for a top 5 draft pick or anything like that. This isn't like the Lions of the late 2000s where they're spinning their wheels at 2-14, 3-13, something like that. This is still a team that was 9-8 and was right there in that graphic, if you will, right up through the holiday season. They weren't mathematically eliminated until that Christmas Day game. And we've talked about it in previous episodes. If things go a different way over the course of the season, maybe the final outcome in the standings is a little bit different. Is that what would have made life a little easier to bear with Montgomery if they would have won a few more games? I don't know. But at some point, him not being here, in my mind, as it pertains to games won and games lost, I'm not so sure that really helps anything. Now, other side of the coin, okay, did Brad do everything he possibly could to maximize any level of return for a guy like David Montgomery, who's at this point, I believe, on the wrong side of 30 and probably has one more contract left in him before the wheels totally fall off? Yeah, I think he probably got as much as he possibly could have in return, and maybe even then some. So I guess if you're choosing to look glass half full, okay, yeah, Brad did a decent enough job, but I'm just not sure him not being here makes this team better.
No, I think at the end of the day, it's a dollars and cents when it comes to the running back position. And I just think even more so, the value that Montgomery brought, the only way I can see that them trying to justify this is that they think they can go get a running back in the 6th round that can go be Jahmyr Gibbs' backup that will have similar attributes to him.
I mean, it's not totally unheard of. Look at what the Bears found in the
With
7th
Kyle
round with Kyle
Monaghan.
Monangai. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So, there are guys out there, but do we really want to be drafting a running back when we didn't need to?
Not
Again,
particularly. Not when we
do
have
we
so
want to
many
go
other
ahead
needs.
and put some draft picks together to move up in the draft? To go get some
Or God
secondary
forbid,
help
make
or
a
something,
trade for actual personnel.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is kind of the nature of the beast with the NFL where, that running back position, you can only get so much money allocated to it. I think the writing is on the wall that this Jahmyr Gibbs deal probably will be happening at some point. It really is unfortunate because I think all Lions fans enjoyed having David Montgomery on this team, what he could bring.
I'm one of them.
So, you look at that running back room outside of Gibbs now, and it sucks. It's not very
Yeah.
good to be blunt. So, listen, again, we started the show saying things can happen, after we record our podcast. So I wouldn't expect the Lions to go sign a running back in free agency. So I would venture that we're probably looking at, they're going to allocate a pick in the draft towards the end of the draft or something.
So yeah, so getting into where you go from here, so that's kind of your lean there. I mean, what about some guy like Aaron Jones? He was just let go by the Vikings the other day. He's been a longtime veteran of the NFC North, played for the Packers, played for the Vikings. Part of what made Montgomery so endearing to this fan base is that he had that added chip on his
Yeah.
shoulder, having been a former Chicago Bear and getting to face the Bears twice a year gave a little bit extra juice for him. You could probably say the same would apply to a guy like Aaron Jones. Do you even entertain the possibility of the Lions just throwing a can of pop and a sack of potato chips some veteran running back's way and say, hey, let's have at it?
So, I mean, that is always a possibility. I think a lot of the veterans that are out there in the Aaron Jones camps of the world, they're going to look at the Lions and see that it is a clear definition of they're going to need a backup. They're going to need a clear number two. That's what he can provide. But I think they also have to be realistic and like, you know, I don't think the Lions can go out and give, whatever the league minimum is, and I know it's pushing each year closer and closer to 1 million. I don't think the Lions can go ahead and really give much more than, you know, million and some change for a backup running back. So, if you do draft a guy, he will be cheaper. He'll have more team control. So I still think that's where they're gonna go. But, if any of these guys don't sign immediately, look to see, as we start to get towards into the summer, maybe we make a deal with one of these guys.
So you mentioned on a couple of occasions over the course of your explanation about the, in your mind, inevitable extension for Jameer Gibbs, and if not inevitable, imminent extension of Jameer Gibbs. And we've talked about this approach from an organizational standpoint numerous times over the course of you and I doing this podcast together, Phil. And I think what the average fan doesn't quite look at through their average fan lens is that there's quite a bit of runway between the Lions and Gibbs. You have this season coming up. You have the fifth year team option out ahead. You have the option of a franchise tag down the road. You have at least 3 seasons in which you're paying Jameer Gibbs, relatively speaking, next to nothing at all. Okay. So we've seen this happen with so many other players where the Lions race so much farther ahead than the average team would to get their people re-signed. And you kind of have the feeling they're going to do the same with Jameer Gibbs. Where does that ethos or that approach come from, and why do the Lions find it so unbelievably beneficial to basically leave years of team control at a very team friendly price on the table and just rush to dump buckets of money on these players well ahead of any type of extension worthy deadline?
Okay, well, a couple things to unpack there. I think the more team control you have, the better off it's going to be. We know he was drafted in the first round, so that, of course, gives us that extra year as well. Um, I think with how productive he is, I think he has been a very team first player here. I think if he had any sort of holdout, or if he had any sort of social media or kind of public outcry about not getting his money, I think the optics of that in that locker room are not going to be very good. And I think the Lions have always been playing, since Barry left, to be honest, of they've known that Detroit has not been this destination for free agents. Anytime we've brought free agents over, we've had to overpay. And I think they finally have a little bit of a culture in place with the winning that has started to materialize that they want to go ahead and reward those that have been part of this journey. So it is like basically two narratives that are kind of at a standstill here. And that's why we've gone into this offseason with everything that transpired throughout the regular season and talking about the key decisions that had to be made. So realistically, the path that you kind of brought up there with the team control, like there is a way that you can keep him on that team control, potentially look at like, franchising him down the road if you really need to,
Particularly why
because
you wait out some of the other expensive
exactly.
contracts that are currently in play.
But it seems like that draft class that Gibbs was a part of, we know JMO got his money. You would have to assume with Alex Anzalone probably leaving this team, Jack Campbell will be getting his money. I think at this point, Brian Branch, all the injury concerns, that's probably the one that has maybe pushed Jahmyr Gibbs more to the front of the line here. But yeah, to be honest, if I'm the Lions, I look at extending Jack Campbell over Jahmyr Gibbs.
Well, and it's not,
So
maybe I shouldn't have phrased it with a player specific mindset. I guess my thing is just from an organizational standpoint, and I can rattle off a few different examples of how they jump to pay guys early. You look at Kirby Joseph, you
yeah,
look at JMO, you look at Derek Barnes, you could even say Hutchinson to an extent off the injury. What is it about the Lions and wanting to basically sprint years ahead of schedule to throw money at their own players? And you mentioned Barry a few minutes ago. Do you think there's some type of deep rooted organizational embarrassment for how things went down with Barry, for how things went down with Calvin, and not wanting to have that level of court of public opinion grade against them for being unfair? You can even say Stafford to a large extent, how, maybe that was the first thing about how, hey, we're now from this point forward with us making the decision to do what Stafford wants us to do for him. We're now going to be a organization of the players, by the players, for the players, and that's the end of it. I mean, it just seems like this is at a level of player friendly behavior in just rushing to pay these guys, the likes of which I can't give any other examples of among other NFL teams.
no, because I think most teams would look at their roster and expend, extend some combination of a quarterback, an offensive lineman, and a defensive end or defensive tackle. And that's really the extent of it. And just about everyone else is kind of at a premium for their position. They better be top three in the NFL at their position if you're going to extend them long term and get them to where they're going to be like the highest paid at their
Yeah,
position.
because what
You
do you
know,
consider? Because teams, throw buzzwords around all the time.
you know,
A core, a core. What do you consider a core to be? I mean, if you ask the Lions, you could argue that their core is like one whole side of a ball's worth of players. You could argue, if you're the Lions, your core is 10, 11 players deep. I think the average team, like you said, probably only views their core as 3, maybe 4 players total.
yeah, yeah. So it is interesting, to kind of go back to what you were saying earlier. I brought up Barry because that's really the first thing in my mind, being a Lions fan, of when it seemed like the Lions weren't always the most player friendly. I think they tried to do a lot by Barry, but I think by the end of it, he really just kind of had enough. They had management issues in the 90s where they were very, very cheap. Barry sought his offensive line leave. I know Lomas Brown has kind of been embraced back into the organization past his playing days, but I want to say he won a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2002. His center next to him, who played with Barry, Kevin Glover, also left in free agency. The Lions never extended Eric Kramer after they went on that long run. So there is a little bit of a history to kind of get into it to where we are now, that it seems like they really wanted to take this into another approach. The Calvin Johnson, though, and I'm glad you brought that up, I think that is really more the precipice into the current day stature here, where I want to say it was when Bob Quinn came over is when they first really had issues as far as like handling the money and all of that. And Rod Wood was in the organization at that time. So clearly I think they were trying to get off of that, and it seems like you're right. Like they have decided to go down on this highway, this path that was completely different than kind of like what the team used to do. So, you know, I think in theory it's a good idea, but there's only so many guys you really should extend. And once you extend some of these guys, you shouldn't have to 2 years later have to go think, okay, so can we actually, you know, rework this person's contract to make it, on more of a team friendly term to free up some cap? Because that's the other part with all these guys they've extended now with where they're sitting. There's just only so much money to go around.
Exactly. And it just seems to me like we said a few minutes ago, if you were to look at any other team in the NFL, they consider their core maybe 3 to 4 guys. And you have the Lions who are looking at having the highest paid player at a certain position covering almost half the positions on the football field. And then you've got situations where you take a guy like Jamison Williams, who you extended him after you just used valuable draft assets to trade up to get a wide receiver who now, because you extended Williams and you utilize your tight ends so much as you do, and you like to utilize the running backs out of the backfield, you just spent all this draft capital to go get a wide receiver who won't have the catch share of your top wide receivers because you just paid your number 2 wide receiver. It just, to a level, it just
So
doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
here's the thing.
The approach.
Brad has not drafted well in the last 2 years.
No.
Had he drafted well, and I'm not even saying well, had he drafted better than what has materialized, I don't think this is much of a concern because I think you'd be able to stockpile some of these positions. Maybe we'd actually have to kind of transition to the next part of Lions news that we get into, an additional tackle that wasn't a complete project that was in the third round. Excuse me, but like that is a problem now that the
Mm-hmm.
Lions have to deal with. And this is a future asset that now you can't trade up. So when you see, we'll pop in with some other news here, Max Crosby getting traded to the Baltimore Ravens for 2 first-round picks. The
I'm
Lions probably weren't
sorry.
in those sweepstakes because they can't get in the first-round pick. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, but yes, you can get into that. So you mean to tell me that Max Crosby is worse or inferior to whoever would have been available at pick number, where they picking 21, 22, 23, somewhere in there? And you got to think if they get back on track or at least regress towards the mean a little bit in a positive direction, that if they're picking in the same general area next year, that Crosby is inferior to whoever could be sitting at that. I don't like that mentality at all if I'm the Lions. If that's all it took was 2 late round, first round picks, and you know how I always kind of view that late first round, those last handful of picks, that's basically a
It's
second round
basically the
pick.
second round. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't like that at all. The only saving grace for me is that I don't know if you paid that close of attention to it, but it seemed for the better part of the week last week that the Bears all of a sudden were the odds-on favorites to land Crosby. Something obviously broke down with those talks, and then it became more like the Eagles, and I forget who the other team was that kind of became more of a leader in the clubhouse, and then just out of nowhere, the Ravens, no pun intended, swooped in and
Yeah.
snatched him up. So at least he's not going to be a problem within the NFC North like we were kind of bracing ourselves to be. And then all of a sudden you have Micah Parsons and Max Crosby as
Yeah.
players that we're going to play twice a year per guy.
Yeah. So I, I don't know. I feel like the Lions are in this hole now that we don't have the answers sitting here on as we're taping this Sunday, March 8th, other than just being very, very critical of some of the decisions that the Lions have made over the last couple years. I think they set themselves up well 3 years ago, and
But it just
Things
goes
just
to
have not
show
materialized in the right
it
way,
just goes to
right?
show how much things change
Oh yeah.
in that amount of time. And it's not like the Lions went out and made a whole lot of changes. Their approach has always been,
Yeah.
let's just keep everything internalized. We realize that the answers to all of our problems are within these own four walls. We don't need to reach outside the building for anything. If you look at what the Lions beat writer Dave Burkett said over the course of this week, he said that he does not anticipate the Lions being big players in free agency once the league year starts up again on March 11th. He thinks it's going to be, as the talking heads once said, same as it ever was: draft, develop, sign our own guys. And it seems like for an organization that is so steadfast in being so overly consistent to a fault to one particular method of team building, it sure looks like things have changed quite a bit over those last 3 years. And another example of that, we'll tear back the other layers of the onion here. Taylor Decker, we talked about him last week, how he announced that he was coming out of retirement, to some mixed feelings within the Lions fan base and obviously within the Lions organization. I think even Dan Campbell, as honest and as candid and whatnot as he is, maybe didn't give the most glowing statement of welcome upon his first comments after Decker announced he was coming back. Basically said, we're going to have to manage what Decker's got and keep him on a pitch count and basically look for another option somewhere. And that, among other things, I don't think sat too well with Taylor Decker. And I'm sure there were some comments made above that about, hey, let's look at maybe restructuring your deal or something like that. Decker probably wasn't comfortable with any of that, requested to be released, and the Lions gave zero pushback in that regard whatsoever. Decker, after 10 seasons, no longer a Detroit Lion. So we'll kind of circle it back around with you, Phil, kind of like what we talked about with Montgomery. Are the Lions in a better situation now with Taylor Decker no longer being part of the equation?
No, but I would argue that um, the way Decker has been breaking down a little bit, I expected him to actually retire. So to me, this was all surprising that he came back in the first place. Um, I think it was a little naive of the Lions to think that if he was coming back, that he would not want to continue on, with the same contract that he had. Um, so I think the issue here that is obviously the elephant in the room is now that he's gone, like who do we even envision as starters on this offensive line at this point? Because the only three names that come to mind are, of course, Penei Sewell, and then basically you're going to have a conversation of, do you keep him on that right side? Do you move him on the left side to protect Goff's blind side? Do you use any sort of, first round pick? If you're not going to be a player in free agency, well, clearly you're going to be getting a second rate option that's out there. Like tackle is a very expensive position, specifically that left tackle spot. And then I mentioned it a couple minutes ago. The Giovanni Manu pick has been an absolute disaster. He has played in one game that was not the preseason. And even in those preseason games, he does not stand out at all. And he is what, 6'8" or something like that?
Yeah.
It has been less than impressive. That was a third round pick. That's where, like, had he been developing or had he had like a better pedigree, or they didn't go straight for physical attributes project kind of player, but actually went for someone with more of a, you know power five, you know kind of mentality from where they got some guy that had actually played some meaningful college football, maybe they'd feel a little bit better about, Decker leaving. So to me, I think Montgomery's the bigger loss. I think just I think Decker was really, really beat down. I don't know what kind of contract he thinks he can go get on the open market,
I don't think
that he
he's
wasn't
making
willing to
$20 million on his next
No,
stop. That's for damn sure.
no. So to me, that seemed like a big pride play by Taylor Decker. Um, so we'll see. Best of luck to him. Um, but to me, it almost makes it way too obvious that the Lions need to go tackle in the first round now. And unfortunately, because that is such a popular position, so many teams need help on their offensive line. Now, of course, the Lions having an obvious need with where they need to go, it wouldn't take much for someone to see the Lions' need being in division and trying to jump them in the first round if there was a tackle that started to fall. So
How
that's a
ironic.
future problem for a future day, but
Yeah,
consider it.
yeah, absolutely. But how ironic is it that the offensive line was such a strength of this Lions team when
Yeah.
they were at their zenith over the last couple of years? And again, we mentioned just a few minutes ago how quickly things change. Now you're going into a 2026 campaign where you could look at any of those five positions on the offensive line, and you cannot tell me without a shadow of a doubt who is going to be lining up at any of those five positions heading into 2026. You know that Sewell's going to be on that line for sure, but you don't know where.
Yeah.
So, just from a planning standpoint, you don't know what you're up against. I think that with the fact that they're paying Sewell essentially left tackle money to play right tackle, I think it only makes sense to bring the most talented asset and the highest paid asset on that offensive line over to protect Goff's blind side. Going back to Dave Burkett once again, he said in his comments, his post combine comments, that the Lions are pretty much a shoe in to give Tate Ratledge another honest look at center, and they're prepared to kind of ride a storm out if for whatever reason it doesn't start out good. So essentially, they're going to give him a little bit longer runway to more or less acclimate to playing center. Beyond that, you don't know what the heck's going on. And that's kind of a precarious situation to be in for a team that is all about tip of the sword and grit and toughness and all that. The one position on the field that kind of embodies that more than anything else is just completely in flux right now. So I guess my question moving forward here is okay, in the same week, you've got Montgomery, unhappy, wants out. You have Taylor Decker, unhappy, wants out. This is not something we've seen from Lions players, at least openly, mind you, this entire regime. Are you starting to see a little bit, maybe in the way of some deterioration in the whole Holmes and Campbell culture? I know that's a big buzzword that's heavily thrown out around this group. You think there's some cracks in the foundation of this culture that bears being a little bit concerned about?
No, but I think with both of the guys that left, I think pride came into it. So I think Decker maybe didn't assume to be the starter like at the end of the season, but I think almost came back expecting the Lions were going to pay him the same amount. He would be welcomed in back as a left tackle, and things would be hunky dory.
I mean, heck,
Lions clearly had different
he
options,
basically gave 2/3 of a retirement speech at the end of the year. So what do you
right?
expect?
And I think with Montgomery, I think he was okay with a split share that was kind of teetering more on 60-40 if it meant he was going to get more of the touches once you start getting into the red zone, and he would still get a bunch of those carries. Um, Lions really used Gibbs a lot more in the red zone last season too. So not only was it like the shares started to get up into the 70-30, 75-25 kind of share, but it was also Gibbs was starting to get the lion's share of the carry
See what you did
in the
there.
red zone. Yeah, pun intended. And that's where I think for him, like I think he still wanted to be here. I don't I but I think he just he's 29, so I think he's probably got at least one more year of being a starting running back in the NFL, and I think he still has a lot of gas left in the tank. So I think he tried to do it that way. So I think the Decker thing is more pride, and I think more speaks to a big misunderstanding. I think Montgomery knew that he was never going to get the carries once Gibbs has kind of posted those numbers he's back, and it's just two very business decisions, a little different from one another, but that's kind of where the Lions stand currently.
And to Houston's credit, they did release Joe Mixon after the acquisition of David Montgomery, so there won't be a clear-cut split share of carries with him. Now, the guy like Joe Mixon's available, maybe the Lions pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I got a can of pop and a bag of potato chips for you. Come on aboard, huh?"
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a thing. Like I think the Decker one opens up the bigger void. You're talking about a left tackle. You're talking about a position that is going to be a huge financial contribution. The only way it won't be is if it is a first round pick, that you plug a starter in there. But Lions are going to have to figure something out. I mean, we're nearing free agency, and just the fact that Dave Burkett was saying don't expect them to be a player, because guess who's a free agent, right now? The player that we have probably mentioned the most on this podcast over the last, 2.5 years that was not a Detroit Lion, that was not in the NFC North, Trey Hendrickson. If the Lions ever wanted to go get Trey Hendrickson, now is the time. He is an unrestricted free agent that they could go get, and it kind of breaks my heart that at this point it seems like it's either something they can't do from a financial standpoint, or they're not willing to do from a financial standpoint.
And I'm sure news is going to break on that tomorrow morning, because why? Well, it always does. So we'll leave you with that little bit
Trey
of
Hendrickson to the Bears.
Yeah,
Wait, no.
we'll leave you with that
Hopefully
little
not.
bit of positivity
God,
here on
that'd be
Kneecaps
terrible.
for Breakfast. We appreciate you being along for this episode and all the rest of the episodes. It's always fun when we can basically take a whole episode and just talk about 2 or 3 players, but you take what you
You
can
know what
get
really
from the
grinds
NFL
my
offseason.
gears?
You, America.
That was kind of our episode today. So thanks for bearing with us, folks.
You got that right. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning. Go Lions. Forward down the field. Over and out.